You know, the system we're all living in, capitalism, it just feels permanent, doesn't it? Like it's always been here, as natural as the air we breathe. But the truth is, as a system, it's actually less than 500 years old. And it was born out of one of the most massive and violent transformations in all of human history.
I think this quote just nails it. It feels so total, so all-encompassing, that we forget it even had a beginning. But it absolutely did. And believe it or not, the key to understanding how it was all built, piece by painful piece, lies with a single, humble plant: cotton.
So, to really get a handle on this massive shift, we've got to rewind the clock. We need to go back about 500 years to a world that played by completely different rules. For most people back then, life wasn't about profit or climbing a corporate ladder. It was governed by the rhythm of the seasons, by tradition, and by the survival of your community.
And wow, when you put these two worlds side by side, the difference is just huge. The old world was built on something called the commons. Think of forests, pastures, rivers, resources that were shared by everyone. Life was about survival. The new system came in and systematically ripped that apart, replacing it with private property, with wage labor, and with this relentless new logic of constant profit and accumulation.
But now, don't get me wrong, this old world wasn't some peaceful utopia. Not at all. There was constant pushback, constant resistance to the powers that be. Centuries before capitalism even had a name, you had radical priests like John Ball asking this very question, challenging the whole idea of a ruling class. This dream of a different, more equal world, it wasn't going to go down without a fight.
And this idea of enclosing things, of fencing them off, it wasn't just about land. It got personal. It got incredibly violent. One really compelling analysis argues that the witch hunts were so much more than just superstition. They were a targeted campaign to crush the economic independence of women, to steal their medical knowledge, and to control their bodies, essentially turning them into factories for the next generation of workers.
So this logic of taking what was shared and making it private, it didn't stay inside Europe's borders for long. As European powers started expanding across the globe, they weren't exporting ideas of free trade and friendly competition. They were exporting violence. Historian Sven Beckert gives it a name: war capitalism.
And here's the thing you've got to understand about this early capitalism. It wasn't about having a better product or being a smarter merchant. It was about having bigger cannons. European traders couldn't compete with the quality of Indian textiles, but they could use gunpowder to blow other ships out of the water and take control of ports by force. Commerce and violence became one and the same.
And all of this violence created the very first truly global economy, a horrific triangle connecting 3 continents. You had beautiful Indian cloth, the product of thousands of years of artistry, being used as currency to purchase human beings in Africa. Those people were then shipped across the Atlantic in the most brutal conditions imaginable, forced to produce raw materials like cotton, which were then sent back to fuel Europe's rise. It was a perfectly closed, perfectly brutal system.
12 million. Just let that number sit for a second. 12 million people. That is the unimaginable human tragedy at the very heart of war capitalism. The wealth that was generated by their stolen lives and their stolen labor, that's what laid the foundation for the modern world we live in today. Okay, so you have this massive global engine of exploitation, and it feeds right into the next huge chapter, the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly, you've got these new hungry machines in English factories, and they create an absolutely insatiable demand for cotton. This forges this incredibly powerful and brutal link between the slave plantations in America and the new factories in Manchester. And the speed of this change was just breathtaking. In just 60 years, you have this rapid-fire series of inventions that completely transform how clothes are made. Each one builds on the last, creating this desperate need for more and more and more raw cotton, a demand that was met by Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which, tragically, made American slavery more profitable than it had ever been before. I mean, just look at these numbers. It's staggering. To spin 100 pounds of cotton by hand took a skilled artisan in India 50,000 hours. A British factory could do it in about 100. This wasn't just a small improvement. This was a revolution, a change that would completely flip the entire global economy on its head. And this is what that so-called efficiency looked like for actual human beings. An abstract number, a price fluctuation on a board in a market in Liverpool, had an immediate, painful, physical consequence for an enslaved person thousands of miles away. The market wasn't some invisible hand. For millions of people, it was the literal crack of a whip.
And this new industrial power had devastating consequences for the rest of the world. Britain didn't just compete with India, it systematically de-industrialized it. It took a civilization that had literally clothed the world for millennia and forced it to stop making textiles. India became a captive market, forced to supply raw cotton and buy back cheap British-made goods.
All right, so the system is in place. It's powerful. But what happens when its very foundation is threatened? This next part of the story shows just how adaptable capitalism is, how it's constantly reinventing itself, finding new methods of exploitation when the old ones are challenged. So you have the American Civil War. Slavery is abolished, and suddenly, global capitalists are facing a crisis, a huge one. The engine of their world, cheap cotton, picked by enslaved people, was gone. The whole thing was about to collapse. And their solution was, well, it was as clever as it was cruel. They came up with sharecropping. Now, on the surface, it looks like a step toward freedom, right? But it was a trap. Instead of being bound by physical chains, freed families were now trapped by the invisible chains of debt. They were forever in debt to the landowners, for seeds, for tools, for food, ensuring that the cotton fields would always have a supply of cheap, controllable labor. And this basic idea, finding new, creative ways to control labor, it goes global. Capital starts to act like water, just flowing to wherever it can find the path of least resistance. It chases the cheapest labor, the weakest environmental laws, the places where it's hardest for workers to form a union. It creates what we now call the global race to the bottom.
Just think about a simple shirt you might be wearing. It's like a tiny monument to this global system. The cotton might be grown with government subsidies in the United States, then shipped to Indonesia to be spun into yarn, then to China to be woven into cloth, and finally sewn together by a worker in Bangladesh. This whole global assembly line is designed for one purpose and one purpose alone, to maximize profit.
And this is the human cost of that race to the bottom. 1,134. That's the number of people, mostly young women, who died in the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh in 2013. They were making clothes from major Western brands, and they were ordered to go to work in a building they knew was cracking, because the pressure to meet deadlines was just that relentless. But, and this is so important to remember, that's not the whole story. It's never been the whole story. For every act of enclosure and exploitation, there has been an act of resistance. From peasants tearing down fences in the 1500s to garment workers walking out of factories today, there is an unbroken 500-year story of people fighting back, demanding dignity and control over their own lives.
Which really brings us to the central paradox of this whole 500-year story. The system's incredible, undeniable ability to create massive amounts of wealth and abundance has always been completely inseparable from the poverty and misery it creates somewhere else. Civilization and barbarity, they're two sides of the very same coin.
So, where does that leave us? Well, if there's one thing this history shows us, it's that nothing is permanent. Empires fall. Systems change. What seems inevitable today is tomorrow's history. So the real question isn't if capitalism will end. The real question is, what are we going to build in its place?